What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited
I guess you keep casting over on the matches.
Oh my god, this song again, really?
Boom.
Boom. I can't lie, I kind of like the song, Luis.
It's actually like kind of a legit song.
Yeah, it's actually kind of good. Limited Resources. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. Boom. And joining me on the line, it's the, what was the card? Thicket Basilisk? No, something Basilisk. Greater Basilisk?
Greater Basilisk. That's what I say. Boom. Greater Basilisk.
Greater Basilisk. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. I still can't believe that song exists and that it's actually like every time you turn it on, I'm kind of like, okay, all right.
Yeah. It's kind of a jam.
What's going on, man? How are you? How are things?
Good. I've been playing a kind of obscene amount of Magic the Gathering online, just in preparation for the Pro Tour next week. And it's a combination of, I really like the Pioneer deck I've been playing, which is a blue-white control, and I really enjoy this draft format. So I don't know, I'm up to 13 draft trophies and 5 Pioneer trophies in the last, 2 weeks, wow, which is kind of a lot.
Well, that's really good, especially those Pioneer ones, because you have to win 5, right? You have to 5-0 to get the trophy. That's way harder than going 3-0 in a draft. So yeah, that's very impressive.
The deck's pretty good, though. We'll see if the new Inverter of Truth Thassa's Oracle deck does not displace it. But
man, I think I have 6 or 7 draft trophies, and I thought I was doing good. You just calmly trouble me.
That is great for you, yeah.
Oh my god! All right, so we're moving on. We're going to be talking about drafting the best color in Theros Beyond Death, and sometimes even playing more than 40 cards in it. Yes, the rules are going to get broken today. We're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to give a recap on the Vintage Cube Rotisserie Draft that I mentioned last week and that a bunch of you followed along with as I did it live. And I'm going to talk about what happened as kind of an example, and then encourage you to do something similar yourself, because it ended up being really fun. Before we get into that, we've got to mention our sponsor. That's channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related on the internet. If you want cards from Theros Beyond Death, they have them in stock right now. You can get sealed product or singles from really any set from Magic history over at Channel Fireball, an awesome resource for that kind of stuff. And then, isn't there a sale or something coming up? Can we talk about that? Is that not a thing yet?
Definitely.
What's going on?
So this weekend, we're recording this here on Thursday, starting this weekend, there's going to be coverage of the Players Tour in Nagoya. You in fact, will be part of that coverage. Indeed. And we'll be running a sale all weekend. So tune into coverage that is going to be on Twitch, on twitch.tv/ Actually, you know what? I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be on the main Magic channel or Channel Fireball. I think it's on the main Magic channel, though.
It does change back and forth. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know either.
But either way, go on Twitch this weekend. You'll see the coverage there if you follow Magic, and stay tuned. We're going to have a special sale all weekend because of that. So the coverage this weekend is also going to be sweet.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We've got our team is going to be in Santa Clara. And that's myself, Matt Sperling, Tom Martell, and Amazonian. And then they've also got a team over in Brussels. So there's going to be a big time, doing it live, and we're going to be doing recorded matches coming over from Japan. So that's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to doing that for sure. So make sure you check that out. Also, patreon.com/limited resources is where you can go to support the show. If you find this show entertaining or useful or informative, or if it helps you win more, or if you just like it or whatever, and you go, you know what? I want to keep these type of shows going. I like these type of things. Patreon is where you can go. You can pick the amount you want. You can change it at any time. There's no obligation, and you get some cool benefits for doing so. Thank you so much to everybody who supports us there. One of the things that we do on the show sometimes, Patreon question of the week. Usually you'd think that would be weekly, but sometimes I slip on it. But we've got one here from Gene who says,
it is you slipping on it because I don't have access to the Patreon.
Yeah, that is true. Thank God. Some of the stuff I put in there about you. Gene says, if you had to choose to either never play one Magic format again or never eat one food again, which would you choose and why?
And presumably this is something we like.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I could do without Vintage, right? Like I've played 3 games of it ever, even though it was actually pretty fun. Or some food I don't like. So let's reverse it. and pick if you could only pick one of these things, what would you pick? So one food and one Magic format. You got to play it for the rest of your life and eat it for the rest of your life.
For me, so there's two answers. One, if the latest set draft is an option, I think I'd probably just choose that, which feels like that's a format, right? You just get to draft the latest set. Yeah. If you have to literally pick one format, it's probably Cube then, because I do like Cube on balance more than I like any other format. But if you were to only play one, I would want a little bit more refreshing of what's going on. And Cube hasn't changed; it doesn't change over much.
Right.
When it comes to only eating one food, honestly, I think again it might be cheating, but a burrito, because you can put a lot of different stuff in a burrito, and it would still realistically, like, I still think it genuinely counts as a burrito, right?
Like if you put like random non-burrito stuff, like breakfast burrito, for example, that counts as a burrito.
Look, a breakfast burrito is a burrito. I'm not saying like, oh, the way to get around this is I'm going to stuff my burrito full of spaghetti and meatballs, and it's going to just be an Italian burrito. No, I wouldn't do that. But I mean, I think a carne asada burrito is awesome. So is a breakfast burrito, and they're both very clearly burritos.
Yes. I agree. Also, it's not like you have to justify this. Everybody knew you were going to say burrito. You said burrito. We know why. I would definitely take Cube Draft as well as the all-timer for the same reasons as Luis. And I got to go with hamburger. I mean, burger is my favorite type of food for sure. And even though I would get sick of any food if I had to eat it indefinitely, I think the burger would take the longest. Let's crack a pack here, Luis, of Theros, before we get into, of course, our main topic here. So first card out is Oread of Mountains Blaze. This is the 1 in a red, 1/3. You can pay 2 in a red to discard a card and draw a card. Card's been playable. It's also an enchantment creature, just not particularly exciting. Altar of the Pantheon, that's the 3-mana artifact that taps for any color and increases your devotion. It also gains you a life when you tap it if you happen to control a god, demigod, or legendary enchantment. Not going to take it here. Scofos War Leader. I've lost some games to this thing. 4 in a red for a 4/5, and you can pay red and sacrifice another creature to give it +1/+0 and menace until end of turn. Relatively cheap sacrifice outlet once it's on the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, both Scofos War Leader and Rage-Scarred Berserker, the kind of like dorky looking 5-drops, have both wildly overperformed.
Yeah.
Neither of them are cards
is really annoying.
Yeah, neither of them are cards you're going to take early, but they're both just pretty good. They do their job.
And of course, this one combos well with Portent of Betrayal, especially given that you automatically have the mana. You've already reached 5 mana threshold to steal and sack. Indomitable Will is next. That's the 1 and a white for a flash enchantment aura that gives a creature +1/+2. I've kind of gone away from this a little bit. I played it more at the beginning of the format, and I still consider it a playable, but I have lowered it a bit on my.
I really like this card in the aggressive white deck still. And I think that we're not going to cover those today, but they are an important component of the format.
Yeah, I haven't really seen an aggressive white deck in a while. All right, here's a pick. Omen of the Sea. Been very impressed by Omen of the Sea. 1 and a blue. Flash enchantment. When it ETBs, you scry 2, draw a card, and then you can pay 2 and a blue and sack it to draw a card. Love this card. I want as many of these as I can get.
Seordain.
Seordain. Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yes, Seordain is quite good. This card, it enables all your enchantment synergies. It gives you something to sacrifice to various effects, including itself, and it's just a good card on its front. Like this is exactly where you want to be.
Speaking of exactly where we want to be, next card up is Final Death. So that's the 4 and a black instant, exile target creature. So get out of here. What did you call it?
The card, which is a great comment, and also clearly not as good as Mire's Grasp.
Yeah, you are right about that, by the way. I now take Mire's Grasp above it.
Yeah, so, I think that you take the first 2 Mire's Grasps above Final Death, and then at the third, you start looking at having some hedges against bigger creatures.
And speaking of me being wrong, I actually did open a pack with both of them in it on Magic Online, so I think they are in the same print run. I hadn't seen that up until when we recorded, but afterwards I have seen it. So yeah, even though at the time, the reason I brought it up is because I'm like, well, you're not going to have to choose between these two, and it's like, no, you sometimes will. And like you said, I would take the first Mire's Grasp for sure. Lampad of Death's Vigil. This is the 1 and a black 1/3 enchantment creature. You can pay 1 and sacrifice a creature to drain your opponent for 1.
a fine card.
Yeah. I mean, we're not going to bump on Final Death unless we open Myers Grasp. That's the only card I would take over it. But still, Lampad of Death's Vigil is a playable.
Well, I mean, this is part of it. So what we're talking about this week is all the different black decks. Worth noting, every single black common except Fruit of Theros is playable to good. It's just absurd.
Very deep color.
It's absurd how many good cards black has. And sure, like, okay, Temple Thief and Freaka's Libation are marginal, but all the rest of them, they range from playable to good to even great. Black just is stacked.
Yeah, the next card we have is another example of that. Is Discordant Piper. That's the one in the black 2/1, and when it dies, it makes a goat. Yeah, and I mean, you can see how these things start to combo. You got your Lampad of Death's Vigil, you got your Discordant Piper, and the damage starts to add up pretty quickly. Our next common is Omen of the Hunt. This is the 2 and a green enchantment with flash. When it ETBs, you search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle, and you can sack it for 2 and a green to scry 2. Fine fixing, but nowhere near where we're at here.
This is a card I tend not to play unless I'm getting additional value. Like in a 2-color deck that doesn't have a good constellation theme, I tend not to play this card. Once you're at 3 colors, or once you have synergy like Enigmatic Incarnation, the blue-green like Birthing Pod thing, or a lot of constellation cards, then the card gets in. But by itself, I think it's like a touch too slow.
Yeah, I need at least a constellation trigger to make it good. What about Eidolon of Philosophy? This is the blue 1/2. You can pay 7 mana, 6 in a blue, and sack it to draw 3 cards. Where are you at on this? I have seen this on the battlefield so many times now.
I don't love the card. I think it's generally not good enough. It's just the thing is, it's too expensive. It doesn't do enough without being able to sacrifice it. And because it's so expensive, you kind of have to play it out most of the times. And then once you start getting towards 7 mana, they're like, all right, I guess it's time to kill that thing.
I have killed many of these, but only when they actually mattered. And in the games where my opponent didn't hit all their land drops, I got to just ignore the card.
Right. When they don't play their 6th land, they're on 5 land, they miss their 6th land drop, you just ignore this thing. Then once they play their 6th land, you think, okay, maybe I'll use this Omen of the Forger or, Natural End now.
Yeah.
It's a card. I had a deck with 2 of them actually earlier today that went 2-1, and the deck was blue-green, heavy constellation, had like Nessian Wanderer, Utopia the Twice Favored, 3 Nexus Wardens, 3 Brine Giants. So I was just like, I'm going to play a 1-mana enchantment no matter what it does. And in this case, it was actually good in that deck because, the game stalled out. I would draw some cards. But yeah, the card is not great. It's not a card I tend to play.
Yeah, same. All right, uncommons. All right, well, our first one's very good. It's Fateful End. That's the 2 and a red instant, and it does 3 damage to anything, and then you scry 1. Is it better than Final Death?
I prefer Final Death. Pick 1, pack 1. I think that black is far and away the best color. That's part of why we're doing this whole episode about it. And Final Death, I think, lines up very well for the format in general, where Fateful End is good. Don't get me wrong. It's a great card. But I would rather just have a Final Death.
I would too.
When we compare Myers Grasp and Final Death, I think part of the comparison is that Myers Grasp has all these format synergies. Fateful End doesn't have those. It's not an enchantment. It's not a permanent. It doesn't work with like Hateful Eidolon. It just doesn't do all the things Myers Grasp does that Final Death doesn't.
It's crazy because Fateful End is such a powerful card, right? 3 damage to anything, instant speed, and you're just getting scry 1, tacked on there for free. It's just a lot to pack onto one card, yet we still rather have the black card. Next is Hydra's Growth. This is the 2 and a green aura. Enchants a creature. The creature gets a +1/+1 counter, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on it.
I have lost this card, and if you have the right support for it, it can be a pretty potent threat, but it's also a lot of eggs in one basket.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when we talked about it on the set review that we were saying, look, there's a line where if you're going to make an aura that goes on a creature, it has to be a certain level of power before I'll really consider playing it. And we both agreed that Hydra's Growth did cross that line. It, to me, at this point, is just over it. There are just simply too many ways, and it takes a long time to actually get going. Yeah, it's exponential. So, when that curve hits that one point where it doubles and all of a sudden it's like, okay, now it's just a lethal threat. That's great. But it does take a long time on its own. The next turn, you're like, okay, it has 2 +1/+1 counters. I'm not dead to that. 4
right.
+1/+1 counters. I'm not dead to that. Okay, I'm losing combat to that, but I'm getting 3 or 4 draw steps, including sacrificing an omen to dig, to try to find a way to interact with this thing. And almost any way of interaction will get the job done. That said, I mean, it is obscenely powerful in the right situation. I at the pre-release, I had somebody I played against, they had 196 +1/+1 counters on their creature. Now, it couldn't get through. It was just a big ground creature. But, once a test and training in the game would have been over. So, I think you can play it, but I have devalued it a little bit relative to picks like Fateful End and Final Death. I don't even have it on the radar. Next is Heliod's Punishment. That's the 1 and a white enchant creature. It enters the battlefield with 4 task counters on it. The creature can't attack, block, and it loses its abilities, but it gains tap to remove a task counter from it. If it has no task counters on Heliod's Punishment, it goes to the graveyard. Actually, it gets destroyed, technically.
This card is great in the aggressive white decks, but boy, do people like playing this outside of it. The number of Heliod's Punishments I've had played against me that have fallen off is not small.
Mm-hmm.
You just have people putting it on your creature in the middle of the game when they're not going to close out the game, and then you punish them for it. So this card's good. Make sure you're aggressive. Look, in the red-white aggro deck or white-green aggro deck, or near mono-white aggro deck, the card does what it advertises, which is removes a creature basically from the battlefield for 4 turns. But in most games, you really have to know that you're going to close it out, because if you can't, then they're all of a sudden up a card.
Yeah, for sure. Last one is our rare. It's called Storm Herald. This is the 2 and a red 3/2 haste, which is kind of the good part. When it enters the battlefield, though, you do return any number of aura cards from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to creatures you control. And then those auras go away at the end step, kind of regardless of where they'd go, they get exiled. Best thing I saw was somebody returned an Eros's
the Blessing of Eros.
Blessing of Eros.
Or Eros's Blessing. I don't know.
But
yeah.
And it was like, okay, yeah, you got me. Like, that's pretty good. But
Eros's
that's like
Blessing.
the best I've seen. Yeah. Otherwise, I've just seen them play this and turn it sideways and trade off for my 2-drop.
Yeah. So I think this card is actually pretty strong. You if you get it early enough in the draft, you can really, I mean, you're gonna prioritize Eros's Blessing regardless, but Aspect of Lamprey can be effective as well. And if you can reliably pull 1 enchantment, this card's a 2 or 3 for 1. And if you can get multiples, it's great. But I still wouldn't take it over just Fateful End or Final Death.
Yeah, I think the issue with it is that you need to get those cards in your deck, and then you need to get them into the graveyard. And that can be tricky. It's not just like guaranteed deck value.
Can do that fairly well. And Eros's Blessing finds itself in the graveyard a lot anyway, because you just put it on a brawler and start attacking.
Yeah, I guess my point is that it's not consistently good, right? It is definitely in the realm of possibility to make it do a thing, but it's not like if you just put this in your deck, you're getting value.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be pretty happy with 3 mana, 3/2 haste to really play it. I would take Final Death here. I'm assuming you would as well.
Yep.
Okay. So let's get into the meat of the discussion here. So first things first, we wanted to talk a few things before we get into how to draft black and why it's so important in this format. One thing that you and I had been chatting about yesterday and today was win conditions in Theros Beyond Death and how you kind of need them.
Yeah, it's funny because, we both often talk about how, like, don't worry as much about winning the game, worry about controlling the game, win conditions are overrated. This is actually a format where I found that not to be the case. And it's always good to call something out when when things end up in a different place than you would imagine. And that is that there are some pretty potent long game engines in Theros. Then there are some decks that take a long time to win the game and have a lot of removal or counter spells to stop you from winning the game. That combined with all the self-mill means I've seen games go to natural decking a lot in this format, but to this format's credit, they don't do so in a way that feels as awful as some formats could.
Yeah.
So,
So how does that change how we approach, win conditions and such?
It means that I think that if you're gonna play a deck that's not an aggressive deck, which is most of the decks in the format, I think aggro is completely good in this format, but more decks are not aggressive than aggressive. You need to have like legitimate win conditions, and I don't just mean like, oh, okay, I've got like a 5/5 or something like that, or I'm playing a Nyxborn Colossus. Like, it's so easy. There's just so much good removal in this format. First of all, there's counterspells like Deny the Divine, which is not only an acceptable main deck card, but a good one. And then there's Memory Drain, which is a card I've seen out of the sideboard a lot. Like both
people
for me,
are playing that a lot now.
Yeah, both for me and my opponent, because when the games take a really long time, it's totally fine to have a 4-mana counter. And then you have, Ichthyomorphosis, Final Death, like just, Dreadful Apathy. Plus, sometimes you'll self-mill your own win condition, and
yes.
And so you want a lot of ways to win, and also ways with escape are great, like Vicious Typhon or Loathsome Chimera are good because they're a little bit harder to kill, and you could just mill them and draw them that way. There are a lot of cards that can prevent you from winning the game. So you need to make sure you have the right tools to do so. And that means maybe playing one additional big creature, one extra Rage-Scarred Berserker or Nyxborn Colossus or Scophos Warleader than you would have. It maybe means putting one copy of Sweet Oblivion, which is actually a plan I've been liking, into your deck.
Every time I get a Sweet Oblivion in the draft, I feel a sense of relief.
Right.
Because I know that if I find myself in one of these matchups, I will have the tool to get the job done.
Exactly. Because, I think we've both just had these games that like things trade off. Both players are kind of milling themselves. There's removal here, removal there, maybe a discard spell, whatever. And then it's just like, oh, I have 7 cards left. You have 6 cards left. I guess I can just kind of hang out here. And
I've been finding myself paying more attention to how many cards are in library than I normally do as well. Because I don't want to find myself in that spot where I could have been advantaged in that way, like when we get to that point, and I just like randomly decided to fire off some draw card or mill card without really thinking about it. I actually am early on starting to think about that in certain matchups, which is crazy.
I mean, the way Magic works is it is a game that favors the defender. That is intrinsically how Magic attacking and blocking rules work. So if you end up in a position where you have equivalent board states, generally the person on defense has the advantage because, when they get to double block a 5/5 with 2 3/3s and whatnot. So if you have one fewer card in your deck and are forced to attack your opponent, they're the ones who are going to have an advantage there.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting, too, how many times I've thought throughout the course of the format that like a card like Soul Salvage, if you remember that one from Dominaria and M20, the 2 and a black sorcery return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand would be so great.
Yep.
Or a way for me to shuffle my graveyard back into my library. I think I could really turbo out because there's a deck I drafted yesterday. It was black-white, and it wasn't dedicated self-mill, but I had a couple of Venomous Hierophants, and I had like a Triton and like 2 of the, I forgot the stupid name, but the 2 and a black, draw 2, lose 2, mill 2. And like, I just was playing a totally normal mid-range, looking for my attacks, not like huge stall out or anything game of Magic. And I look down and I've got 15 cards in my library. And it's like not that late in the game, and I'm just like, wow, like I have this huge graveyard. And of course, we'll talk about it, but you try to take advantage of that with escape and that kind of thing to get yourself ahead on board and win the game that way. But I keep looking down at it and thinking, boy, if I wanted to push hard in this direction and I had the tools to like reshuffle or whatever, I could mill my opponent easy. Like, I could just outlast them very easily.
Yeah. And it's, you really have to pay attention to what you're planning on closing out the game with. And this doesn't mean every single deck. The mid-range green deck that has 15 creatures is probably going to be okay. But I'm more speaking to the blue-black or black-white decks that have maybe 2 cards that can close out the game, and then your opponent's just so easily going to be able to answer or counter those. You have to have a plan. So that can be Sweet Oblivion. That can just be playing your second Omen of Death, even though you don't really want it, just to have a way to bring back your creature, or put 2 Rage-Scarred Berserkers in, because I've lost some games where I've done a really good job controlling the game and then just could not finish it. And you don't want to be in a position where you're having to use your removal on their random creatures because you have to attack them.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny too, because you'll find yourself in these positions where your library is getting low and maybe you'll have like a search effect or something. And you're just like, yeah, I got nothing. Yeah. I got a few more 3/3s I can dig up here, but maybe I can escape something back. But if they have one more answer in their library, I can't win this game. That actually happens sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
and that kind of dovetails into the next topic, which is when it's actually correct to play more than 40 cards. And I really want to approach this with delicacy, because or delicately rather, not as a delicacy, because everyone's going to want to do this because it's like so cool. It's so like, look at how clever I am. I'm playing 47 cards.
Clever, yeah.
And at the outset, I want listeners to know you almost always should just play 40 cards. And before this, in formats that aren't specifically changing that paradigm, like this one, it's like 99.99%. There are some exceptions, and here is the place where I think there's an exception in Theros. If you have a lot of good escape cards and a lot of self-mill, you're more likely to want to play more than 40 cards than any other deck. Basically, I have done it in a green-black deck before, because to a degree, your escape cards are bound by how many cards you can mill, and that there is a limit to that when you're playing 40 cards, that if you're playing something like 50 cards with a similar mana ratio, so like let's say 22 land or so, or 21 land, you end up wanting to play more cards because you have 3 Relentless Pursuits and 2 Venomous Hierophants, and you have like 4 or 5 escape cards, and you just want enough time to bring them back over and over and over again.
Right. And that is funny, because there are times when your resources are leveraged so that you have tons of ways to mill and even a significant number of escape cards. So what's the one piece of the pie that you're missing? And that is enough cards in your graveyard where you could actually bump.
So the times when you should not do this, when you don't have a lot of self-mill or you don't have a lot of escape cards. Also, when you have a great card, like I'm never going to play more than 40 cards if I have Cure Best the Sea God in my blue-black deck. Even if I have a lot of good self-mill and some good escape cards, like that one card is so good and will finish the game so effectively that you just shouldn't reduce your chances of drawing it. You should, in fact, change your deck so it's maybe less about self-mill and more about other things. So don't go nuts over this. And in fact, if you're doing it more than one every like 10 to 12 drafts, you're definitely doing it too often. But if you're specifically green-black or sometimes black-white, if you have a lot of escape and a lot of self-mill, and your cards are all of like roughly equal quality, then yeah, it's fine. Blue-green can do this too, potentially. But you have to meet those 3 criteria. Have a lot of self-mill, have a lot of escape, and not have any really outstanding cards. Mostly have a lot of cards that are similar, where you just want more time to bring back Vicious Typhon. Right,
because you're basically doing your deck is flat.
Yeah.
Right. Power level wise.
Because it also costs you less. If all your cards are like 5.7s out of 10, then whether you have a 20% less chance of drawing a specific one doesn't matter that much. If you have a 10 out of 10, then yeah, you don't want to put that at risk.
You have to maximize. So yeah, so careful with that advice. Because if you walk away from this being like, oh, Luis said it's fine to play, 45 cards in my deck, that is not, you didn't listen closely enough.
Yeah. So, but I also do think it's a legitimate strategy that you have to keep in mind. So
yes, for sure. Okay. What about what other stuff do we want to talk about before we get into black?
Two more small notes. Again, I've been drafting a ton. These are just like format general stuff. There's a lot of good 4-drops I've found. So that should also lead you to deprioritizing 4-drops. Stuff like, the Venomous Hierophant is the best, common black 4-drop. So what it means is that you're less likely to want Nyxborn Marauder, which is also a 4-drop, because there's just so many cards that cost 4 mana. And, that it's worth noting that point at the curve is particularly impacted. So you should kind of deprioritize cards that fit into that, and I think that it just so happens that 4 tends to be a color that, or a casting cost that has a lot of groupings there.
Yep. And then what about splashing?
So there's actually the opportunity between Traveler's Amulet, Altar of the Pantheon, Unknown Shores, and Omen of the Hunt to splash. And note that 3 of these aren't even green. In fact, they're colorless, right? Traveler's Amulet, Unknown Shores, and Altar are all colorless. And it's funny, actually coinciding with black, if you could end up with a deck that can play like 10, 11 swamps and has like, 70% black cards, you can play a Traveler's Amulet, an Unknown Shores, an Altar of the Pantheon, and like 2 or 3 different other basics and splash 1 card of a couple different colors. Like that's completely legit. And in my green decks, I found it even easier to splash.
Yeah, you get the Caryatid there too.
Yeah, I'm a little low on the Caryatid because it dies to favor of Mogus, or Mogus's favor rather. But
yeah, that is such a beating for sure.
Yeah, and Omen of the Forge too. That I don't like basing my deck around it quite as much. But I have found Unknown Shores to be more playable than I expected it to be. That is a card that at its outset, I think everyone's like, don't play this card. It's bad. It's bad. But if you're flashing multiple off-color cards, and the games go really long, and this kind of goes back to the win condition thing, where when the game is going to go really long, you're going to have a lot of time. It's going to stretch how powerful your deck is. You actually get a pretty big payoff for splashing a Rise to Glory in your like blue-black deck. You do. You actually get a lot of leverage out of putting these cards in your deck that you wouldn't have otherwise done, because like I've splashed the Euro, the blue-green Titan, in a blue-black deck off of a bunch of sources because I was going to self-mill a bunch, and this is a really good finisher. And even when you normally wouldn't splash some cards, I think that it's worth doing so in this format.
Yeah, when we talked about it on the set review, we did outline. We said generally you shouldn't play this card. Here's the situation where you could, and it turns out the situation actually comes up fairly often in the format, which is, like you said, if the time constraint is less so, you want to be splashing cards ideally that the one extra mana color is cheaper, right? That it's a 2 or a 3 mana spell, so that you're paying a 1 mana tax to use Unknown Shores to cast it, but you're not giving it up 2 to 3 turns to do so. And then also the fact of when you cast the card, does that matter? Some cards are extremely time sensitive and really need to be cast early in the game or at the earliest possible convenience. And other cards aren't. Sometimes you just cast them and they're good and that's it. And it turns out that the way that the format lines up, there's a lot more of those and you get more time. And there's even some cheaper ones that are okay to splash as well. So I've had a Unknown Shores sneak into my deck a few times already as well, where normally I try to avoid it kind of all the way.
Yeah. And just some notes, just because this format's not, every format's different. And this format in particular, I found, here's why I think I've been enjoying the format so much. The games go long, but they actually feel fairly action-packed.
Yep, they do. It's not go, 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 go. And there's a lot of different archetypes here as well. I mean, in the same draft, you can face a red-white deck that is applying pretty darn significant pressure to your life total and kind of making you react to it. And then you can play around counter spells for 4 turns in a row against an opponent the next round. Yeah. Which is just a totally different look. Yeah. And that feels cool. I like having a shift. I like the sideboarding. I like all of it.
We're also going back to kind of older school Limited in some ways, where this used to be the case, when you played Limited a long time ago, where you had your Doomblade and they had a Sheevan Dragon in your deck. You just knew you couldn't use the Doomblade on anything but the Sheevan. Cut to modern formats, all the games are so fast, you have to use your removal spells on curve. If you don't, then you're just going to fall too far behind. This is a format that rewards you for taking the time to try to, like when they play a 3/3, try to figure out, maybe take some damage even, but answer it without using your good removal spell on it. And then save that good removal spell for when they do play their Brian Giant or they do play their Archon of Falling Stars or what have you. Like there is a lot more of that kind of counterplay, which I think is good. I think that is generally good gameplay rather than like kind of point and shoot because, if you don't, you're going to get run over. There's just a lot less of that.
Yeah, I really also appreciate that this set seems to be quite well designed from a card by card basis, but then fitting them into the big picture and it without being too gimmicky. Yeah, it has the enchantment thing going on, but basically it just feels like regular Magic, just with some twists. And I really, coming off of Throne of Eldraine and stuff, this one feels a lot more kind of solid, like a lot from a design aspect. So, okay, so let's get into the main topic here, which is how to draft black, right? You and I have both been loving the black decks. It feels like whenever we send each other, a picture of our list from whatever draft we're in, it's like black, white or black, green or black, blue. We're just oftentimes drafting black. And that makes some amount of sense, right? We've said that probably the 2 best commons are both in black. So it's not uncommon for you to be like, well, my rare's not so great. I didn't get anything great at uncommon. I'll just take this Final Death of this Mire's Grasp, and then it kind of sets you on that path. But I've found it to be even deeper than that. I've had many decks that had only one, either Mire's Grasp or Final Death. I mean, it is not like every black deck you play is rife with these type of removal spells, yet the cards seem to be able to support it. So why don't we get into it and just break it down by each of the options that you can pair with black, because, well, those are the ones that you're actually going to play in the format.
Yeah. And This isn't quite Urza Saga Black, where for those of you who didn't play during Urza Saga, which I imagine is basically all of you,
including me,
actually including me, I wasn't really good at draft at this point either, and didn't play in any tournaments. Right. So
all of us,
but Black was unbelievable. At common, it had Pestilence, Corrupt, Expunge. These are like all-time bangers for limited at common. So it was correct to force mono black or force black in Saga, even if the person passing to you was like face up taking black cards.
Insane.
We're not there for Theros. The black is very, very good. It's the best color by a lot, and it can support a lot of people. But it's not to the point where I'm just forcing it. I'm not. I will, of course, draft it if it appears to be even half open, but it's not something that I'm gonna jump into. I'm not taking Myers Grasp over Dream Trawler, and I'm not taking like a mid range black common over like Dreadful Apathy or anything like that. But if black is open and you end up near mono black, which is kind of like a secret fifth one, you're almost always going to splash something because you don't need to play 17 swamps. You can play 12 swamps and a splash color, and you'll usually just be fine. So, it's not necessary that you go completely mono black. So that's why we're not going to specifically talk about mono black. But if it's open enough to be mono, then your deck's probably obscene anyway. So
yeah, I've been nearly mono black multiple times.
Right. But you're almost never just exactly there because so playing 4 planes in a Dreadful Apathy is still usually better than whatever your 23rd card is.
Exactly.
So the deck I've been having actually the most success with is black-white. Though I think black-white and black-green are very close. I think black-red is a little behind that. And I actually think black-blue is behind all the other ones with like a caveat where, going back to the win condition question, if you can have some good win conditions, black-blue can be potent. But really, I have not found black-blue to deliver. Even good blue-black decks, I think, have lost long games because without a good closer, you are going to eventually, like, their escape cards also make it harder for you to control the game. Escape is very good against control.
Yep.
So black-white is a really grindy deck, and it's a control deck, and it's kind of enchantment-based. It's got this enchantment sub-theme. So it's funny, I joked with you when I was writing down the key comments. You can kind of almost erase Myers Grasp and Final Death because those are the top 2 commons for all the black decks. So
right. Just pencil those in.
Yeah. So it goes without saying. So besides Myers Grasp and Final Death, key commons are like Dreadful Apathy, Heliod's Pilgrim, Blight Breath Catoblepus, and Mogus's Favor. Really, really important one. This is the +2/-1. Key uncommons, Rise to Glory, the black-white uncommon is fantastic. When you get to, like, the dream is bring back a Catoblepus and a Myers Grasp and just killing 2 more things. But really, if you ever get back 2 cards with this, which is very easy to do because Myers Grasp and Dreadful Apathy both put themselves in the graveyard very conveniently, it's great. This is the best Hateful Eidolon deck as well. And Hateful Eidolon's a card I almost always take when I'm black, even in other color combinations.
It does perform. You only need to do a couple of things to make it really good.
Yeah, it's a 1-drop enchantment. You really only need to draw 1 card off it to feel like you're doing all right. It's not hard to do with Myers Grasp, but the real combo is with Mogus's Favor, where you can just keep killing 1 toughness creatures and drawing a card. Sometimes even your own, depending on what's going on. Gray Merchant's fantastic in this deck, as is Farika's Spawn. I've actually found Reverent Hoplite, the white and a 4/1/2 that gives you a 1/1 equal to your white devotion, to be very good, even though it's kind of funny because this is like often a mostly black deck. First of all, once you're devoting to multiple colors, Altar of the Pantheon becomes a fine card. It helps you cast these cards and makes them better. And if you get 2 tokens off the Hoplite, it's fine. If you get 3 off it, it's pretty good. So it's just not hard to do that. It sometimes means you change your creature base a little bit, put in a Nyxborn Courser or what have you, just to make sure this gets a little better. But for the most part, this is a card I found rewards you for taking it. And then Archon of Falling Stars, the 4 white, 4/4 when it dies, put an enchantment on the battlefield. Also a good card. And especially good if you can wait to play it till you have like a mana up for the Lampad to sacrifice it. So if they do go to exile it, you can sack it and get your enchantment.
Yeah, the Lampad actually gives you protection from a lot of these things. And it is weird how it can be the glue in a lot of these decks. We talked just a minute ago about putting the Omen of Death right? Is that what it's called? Omen of Death? Anyway, the Black Omen in your deck to get stuff back. And, there's little combos that you can do all over the place. Like you can sacrifice your Gray Merchant to it and then Omen of Death and then recast it. And, sometimes your opponent's just dead at that point. I've found that it pulls a little bit more than its weight, even in decks like this where it's not really optimized.
Yeah, and on that note, the Soul Reaper of Mogus, the 2/3 that can sack creatures for 3 mana, is also very good. Mm-hmm. I actually want a Soul Reaper of Mogus in just about all my black decks because
totally
it gives you value when they're putting negative enchantments on your creatures. Just in play, it's good to, whenever things go wrong. And then there's also various ways to get free fodder to sacrifice, whether that's escape creatures or tokens like Omen of the Sun or whatever. It ends up being pretty good. Commons you don't need to prioritize for this deck. Captivating Unicorn, the 5 mana 4/4 that taps a creature. That's just not what this deck's about. Like, sure, you can play this card, but it's not a high priority.
Right.
Daybreak Chimera, the 3/3 flyer, again, playable in this deck. It's not like I actively don't want it, but I don't prioritize it. And so I don't get as many as I would otherwise because I would rather take Heliod's Pilgrim over that in this deck most of the time.
Absolutely.
Karamitra's Blessing and Indomitable Will are both combat tricks that this deck doesn't really need. And then Underworld Charger, this is going to show up in a couple lists, and I want to note, if you have no other escape cards, I'll generally play an Underworld Charger, because otherwise you're just letting all that free graveyard value disappear. But most of the time, these decks don't really want Underworld Charger, because it doesn't actually accomplish what this deck's trying to do. It doesn't block. And killing them...
Right.
I mean, killing them is important. That's what the whole win condition spiel is about. But you can usually find... I'd rather have a Rage-Scarred Berserker, because that can actually block.
Right. And that does become critical, right? Yeah. The turn when you cast your Underworld Charger and it can't block can be a really big turn.
Yeah. You also are just hoping to pick up a Pharika's Spawn. Also, Mogus's Favor is really where I want to use my escape in these decks. And then Scavenging Harpy is another fine card. This is the 2-1 that exiles a card, a 2-1 flyer. It just doesn't block very well either, so I tend not to play this card, and maybe I'll side it in, but even then, it's just not... It's a perfectly playable card, but it's not something I tend to prioritize in this deck. So this deck is really just trying to get card advantage through things like Hateful Eidolon, like Rise to Glory, like Heliod's Pilgrim or Funeral Rites or Blight Breath Catoblepus, and then just kill everything, that they play. And it's pretty easy for this deck to do that. We mentioned Entrancing Lyre last show, by the way, about how good it was. This is the kind of deck that's just absolutely A+ in, because... Yes. It lets you lyre down their 3/3 early and then switch to their 5/5 later. And now that you've got blockers for the 3/3, it's exactly the kind of removal this deck wants.
And I did want to highlight that, that is really the crux of what this deck is this actually has the best combination of colors for removal, right? Oftentimes it's red and black, but I think in this set, it's white and black provides the best common removal options. And so you're basically... that's the core of the deck, and then you're leveraging stuff that supports that by the cards that you mentioned, like Heliod's Pilgrim. It goes and gets multiple forms of removal in some of
three different ways to kill things.
Right. Hateful Eidolon gets you cards for using the types of removal that you want to use. Yeah. So that really is the core of this deck, is the fact that you just get this absurd suite of removal to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, white has Dreadful Apathy and Heliod's Pilgrim, so it's got 2 premium removal spells. Which is
basically
which is more than it usually would. So
yes.
So I found this deck to be really good. It's not super rare or uncommon dependent, but as with most control decks, if you want to finish the game, you do need something. Pharika's Spawn is basically the best way to do that. But Rise to Glory, Archon of Falling Stars, Grey Merchant especially is one. If I have Grey Merchant, I'll really prioritize Omen of Death, because looping Grey Merchant a few times is a really easy way to win this game.
Yeah. Oftentimes the game's just over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
Grey Merchant, by the way, a good bump to uncommon.
Yes.
It is still awesome.
Yes, very, very good. Also, this deck can sometimes win off just playing 2 Catoblepus, killing after you've killed 4 of their things, and then just attacking them.
Yep.
Black-green escape. So this is when you're pairing black with green. Kind of the one-sentence tagline is self-mill fueled card advantage. It's trying to use self-mill and good green and black escape creatures, though more green than black, to finish off the game. So the key commons besides the Grasp and Final Death are Loathsome Chimera, Blight Breath Catoblepus, Warbriar Blessing, Venomous Hierophant, Relentless Pursuit / Funeral Rites. These are both the spells that mill. And then Omen of Death. Omen of Death is, I think, at its best in this deck because you just see so many cards. It turns Omen into kind of a tutor because you just get to see so many different options. The key uncommons are Acolyte of Affliction, the green-black one. Farika's Spawn and Grey Merchant are both insane here, as is Fairy's Brand Brawler, the 4/4 that fights, because this deck's all about recursion. The things you don't need to prioritize, random green dorks, stuff like Nylea's Hunt thing, the 4/3 for 4, or the Hyrax Scout, the 3/3 for 3. Like, that's just the kind of card that doesn't really get there. Nyxborn Colossus I found is actually okay because it's big enough, but the like mid-range one, or even the 5/3 Trampler, Nylea's Presence or Aspect of Nylea, that is just not what this deck needs to close out the game. Nylea's Forerunner, that's what I'm talking about. You want to be killing them with Loathsome Chimera, Vicious Typhon, and Venomous Hierophants. That's kind of your army. And this deck really wants to use its removal on flyers because it's got the ground in great shape. Again, Elysian Caryatid. Look, it's not like I'm not going to play the card, but this is the 2-mana 1/1 that taps for mana. But I just don't take it super high because it just dies so easily that getting it killed by Mogus's Favor is kind of like getting it killed for free. It just didn't cost them.
It's a disaster.
A card didn't cost them much mana. But yeah, so it's a card that I think is good, but is not a high priority because of that. Underworld Charger again suffers in this deck, where you really would rather be bringing back Loathsome Chimera or Typhon because those block. And then I also have Self-Mill card number 5, which means once you have 2 Hierophant and a Relentless Pursuit and a Funeral Rites, the value on the next one goes down because you actually might deck yourself. This is the deck that most likely wants to play more than 40 cards.
Yeah, and that is where you can really fly a little too close to the sun if you're not careful.
This deck usually doesn't have too much of a problem finding a win condition because it's got so many creatures in it. But again, watch that self-mill. You can end up decking yourself, and this has happened. Yeah. And green black is perfectly good.
It's really good. Yeah. Early on, this was my favorite archetype. It's still at the top of my favorites as well. So yeah, I think it's really good.
So red black actually has 2 different kind of looking decks. There's red black aggro and there's red black control, and both of them can have the sacrifice sub theme. Though I haven't found red black sacrifice to be its own deck in the sense that there are red black decks that have sacrifice synergies, but they're not so focused on that I've had a deck that I'd really describe as red black sacrifice, if that makes sense.
No, they just pop up as an individual interaction rather than like a deck level theme.
Yeah. So the key commons besides Myra's Grasp and Final Death, Blessing of Erois for aggro. This is Underworld Ragehound, Underworld Charger. Finally, the Charger gets a chance to shine. It's a great card. Venomous Hierophant, Incendiary Oracle, the 2/2 for a 1 and a red that has fire breathing and then exiles things that it kills, and then Omen of the Forge. So here you're looking, still the removal's higher, but you actually put a pretty high premium on the recursive threats that curve out. So the Ragehound and the Charger. Venomous Hierophant still very good here because it still mills your escape cards and is a pretty burly creature. I'm a little lower on Omen of the Forge. The first one's pretty good, but they just do not work all that well in multiples because there's just so many decks that have very, very few targets for Omen of the Forge, and you don't want to end up in a position where you're unable to really get value out of your card, which is easy to do.
Yeah, even though it does more than Shock does, if I told you how valuable is your first Shock, you'd be like, it's pretty darn good. And the second one falls off pretty quickly. And the third one is like, do I even want to put this in my deck? And Omen of the Forge suffers from that same thing.
Yeah. So, and then for control, the key commons are kind of the same, except you move up Blight Breath Catoblepus and Mogus's Favor, and Final Flare gets a little better because it doesn't mind sacking its weak creatures to take out something big. Whereas the aggro deck doesn't really want to do that most of the time.
You need to have your board state on underneath you for sure.
And then the key uncommons are the same. The good black uncommons, Farika Spawn. Gray Merchant. Anax Hardened of the Forge, the red demigod, is very, very good in this deck. And this is what makes you slant a little bit more towards red, because this card enables sacrifice really well, enables the 4 Power Matters theme, can just be a really good threat by itself. So I like that one. And then Heroes of the Rebel is also really good. The 5 mana 4/4 that makes a 1/1. So, and then these decks also often will play the Scophos Rage Warden or whatever, the Maze Warden, and then
War Leader.
War Leader, that's what it was. Oh, yeah, the War Leader, not the uncommon one. It will play that one too, but it'll play both the 5-drop commons, Rage Guard, Berserker also.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that I've felt like the more controlling sort of attrition based version has been much stronger than the aggressive one. I've been able to deploy the game plan much more consistently using it, playing it almost like the green black deck, right? It just has slightly better removal and some differences with the red. But I found that the aggressive version is very finicky and hard to set up exactly how you want. You kind of need to get certain 2-card combos to really access that power. Where when I play the more controlling version, I just get to kill their stuff and start bringing back, the dogs, basically, right? I get to bring back Underworld Charger, and I get to bring back Underworld Ragehound, and just kind of slam them. And for whatever reason, even though those cards are not very good in a what we'd traditionally call a control deck, I've liked them a lot in this. I don't know what you want to call it, mid-range attrition. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but the not full-on aggressive version of the deck, and I've had success with that. So I don't know why that is this time, but for whatever it's worth, I've had more success with that than trying to be like outwardly assertive with this color.
Yeah, and these decks aren't super different. The biggest advantage of going aggressive is that Portent of Betrayal becomes a lot better, because in both cases, you can have sack outlets enough where you'll want to steal their creatures and sack them. But in the aggro deck, sometimes you actually just want to cast the card Portent of Betrayal. And that makes it a lot more powerful, because all of a sudden it actually opens up kind of what you'd expect the main use of the card, which is not actually the main use. The main use is to sacrifice things, but just taking their thing and hitting them with it matters more for aggro. And the difference between these two decks is, instead of having a good curve in the aggro version, you make your curve a little worse, add a few more removal spells, bam, you got the control version. The advantage of the aggro version is sometimes you can get cards like Ragehound and Incendiary Oracle pretty late. People don't seem to want them, especially because if they're not drafting aggressive decks, then they'll pass these cards. And if you don't open good higher rarity cards, the aggro deck gives you a little bit more leverage, because an all-common control deck is going to have a harder time than an all-common aggro deck, because control decks you're kind of built to try to beat all the cards they play, whereas aggro deck, they're trying to beat the expensive cards by just stranding them in their hand. So you really should consider the aggro deck if you're not getting, great cards. If you start with, Croxa, the red-black Titan, and, get past an Entrancing Lyre, and all of a sudden, sure, draft the control deck. But if you don't, it might be better to have 2 Ragehounds, an Incendiary Oracle, and an Underworld Charger instead of 4 different removal spells or more expensive cards, and just try to tempo them out.
Right.
And then lastly, we've got blue-black control. It's a long game control deck that often needs a win condition. This is this deck, its commons are Mire's Grasp, Final Death, Thirst for Meaning. I put a pretty high priority on, because this deck tends to have the time to draw extra cards. It needs the way to do them. Ichthyomorphosis is a great removal spell. Venomous Hierophant, still good here. Good blocker too. This card is very, very strong. Omen of the Sea is very good. And then Deny the Divine as well. So its top commons are basically all removal spells and card draw. Unsurprising. For key uncommons, besides, again, the same suite of good black uncommons, Aliros Enrapture, the 2/3 that makes a 3/2 reflection, I found that to be incredibly good at this deck, because first of all, it's just a really powerful card, and because it's exactly what this deck needs, because it by itself cleans up almost all the early aggression. Like, you play this, you trade for a 3/3, now their 2/3 can't attack you. Great. And then Sweet Oblivion is a card, like you said, I felt exactly the same way. I can tell you've drafted a lot, because when you get one of these, you feel like, okay, no matter what, I've got at least a plan to win the game. You want the one tweetable.
And there's a real palpable relief with that too. It's strange because you do just find yourself in the situation. And the thing about Sweet Oblivion is that not only does it give you that tool, but you're almost guaranteed to get to use it, because even if you cast a Venomous Hierophant and mill it, it has escape, so it's good to go either way.
Yeah.
So it's extra insurance,
Yeah, and then I want to mention Thassa's Oracle. This is a rare, of course, the blue 1/3 that lets you kind of pseudo scry, and if you have cards less than your blue devotion, you win the game. I found this card to be a really good early pick. If you can build a control deck, Thassa's Oracle is a really good win condition. It's just not hard to win the game, and when your opponent doesn't know this is your plan, I've had opponents sit there and draw go with me because I have 7 cards left and they have 12. And then when when I get down to like 3 cards left, I play this with 5 blue devotion, and they're just like, oh, I guess you did have a plan.
Yeah. Like, I guess the game just ends on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice backup plan while being not bad on the front either. It's not great, but it's fine.
Also, if I have it, I really do prioritize getting an Omen of Death, because I want to be able to play the Thassa's Oracle early and then just know that later I can just chump with it or sacrifice it and then bring it back and kill them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, the big scary thing is if it gets exiled. Right? Like Deny the Divine hitting it is like, no.
Yeah. If you're playing blue-black,
that's for your...
I do prioritize picking up 1 or 2 memory drains for the sideboard, because you will run into the matchup where you want them.
For sure.
So I think that if you start any draft and you see like a 3rd or 4th pick Myers Grasp, I'm almost always moving in. Like, black is that good and that card is that good that I'm really like, I'm not forcing black, but if I see any good black cards in the middle of pack 1, I'm just gonna pivot a lot of the time, or at least take them to have the opportunity to do so, because black has so many good cards at common and uncommon. It's critical. Look at its uncommons: Farika's Spawn, Drag to the Underworld, Gray Merchant. Like, it just has.
You forgot the best one.
What's the best one?
Timuret.
Oh yeah, well, I know you thought Timuret was unplayable, but Timuret's really, really good.
Oh my God, that's such a stretch. But Timuret, by the way, has been
Timuret's essentially a bomb, and you thought it was unplayable. It's really weird.
No, come on, you stop trying to make this happen. I wasn't as high on it.
You
early,
literally
but,
said
that
these things are disappointing and unplayable. So
I did not say that.
This format's very deep, and I found that there are a lot of different decks you can draft. I just wanted to go over the best color and all the different ways to draft it, just kind of at the outset.
I love that.
And we'll continue going over the decks. I really, again, we've both been loving this format, so not hard to talk about it. But there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of counter leveling and a lot of sideboarding, especially as you get to these more controlling games where you see almost every card in your deck most of the games.
Yeah, the way I would describe it is it makes you think about the way that things are going to play out, other than just what happens if we both resolve our spells. Yeah, and that is, I love that. I mean, that makes me, dig deep into the sideboard, and when I'm drafting, think about things down the line, and that's one of the beautiful things about our game. So good luck with those ones. You should definitely be trying out one of these color pairs. If you haven't had success in the format yet, and you find that you can drift into one of these, you should definitely try it, because the power levels here and all of them. Before we go, I did want to talk about the Vintage Cube Rotisserie Draft that I did last weekend. I mentioned it on the show briefly, and I just wanted to kind of say how it went, and then also outline a little bit of how it works in case you want to try it at home yourself. Because you don't need a vintage. Come on, this is fun. People like this. Dang it. Wait, this is the sound thing you put in? Oh my God. I thought that was actually you.
No, that's a sound effect I have prepared for the MM files.
For any time I talk.
The Marshall monologue files.
Oh my God. It wouldn't be a monologue if my co-host would, chime in. This is optional.
That is a reasonable position to take.
Plus, I have to say, this really makes me mad, because you know what? You would love this. You would have absolutely loved every second of this Vintage Rotisserie Draft. I swear to God, it was super fun.
Okay. Not going to lie. I actually do love Vintage Rotisserie Drafts, but you know another thing I love?
What's that?
Giving you a hard time. That's another thing I love. So.
Yeah, and putting in new sound. Man, it's such a tilt that our recording software just won't work from my end. Like, it is so unbelievable. Come on, man. All right, I'm just going to plow through here. I don't care anymore. I'm just doing it. So we did the Vintage Cube Rotisserie Draft, and the basics of this are you lay out your entire cube face up. In this case, we were lucky because Ryan Spain actually maintains the Magic Online Vintage Cube in real life, so we had them there. But it can be any cube that you happen to own. And then you draft it, and it's face up. So the players are all standing around the table. And most people do what they call a snake style draft, where it goes picks 1 through 8. But then 9th pick is that 8th player picking back to back. And then it goes reverse order 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then the first player gets 2 picks, and then it goes back and forth again. This way, it mitigates some of the downside of being last or
right.
whatever. As it turns out, strategically, it actually advantages the people who get to make the back-to-back picks in a pretty meaningful way. So that's the person that gets to pick first. Now, the literal first pick of the draft, they just get 1 card. But then after that, they get to be the snake, if you will. So they get to pick back-to-back cards for the rest of it. And if you're 8th pick, which happens to be what I was, then you get back-to-back picks for the whole thing until the end. So this lets you take 2 cards in an archetype or 2 types of cards that can work well together and know that you're going to get both of them. Where if you have an individual pick, you might take half of a combo, and by the time it comes back around to you, the other half's been gone. So as an example, I want to walk through how the first about 3 rounds of our draft went. So first pick was Adam, and he took Black Lotus. Then going down the line, it went Mana Crypt. That's the 0 mana that taps for 2, and you flip a coin. It does 3 to you if you lose. Then Ancestral Recall. Then Soul Ring. Then Mox Sapphire, Jet, Ruby. And that left it to me, and I took Mox Emerald and Mox Pearl. So of the first 9 picks there, all of the Moxen were gone. Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Ancestral Recall, and Black Lotus all gone. Then, as it went back the other direction, it was Time Walk, Emrakul, the Aeon's Torn, Library of Alexandria. Then people were starting to worry about lands already. Volcanic Island, then Mana Drain, Tinker, and then again back on first pick, which was Adam, who took Black Lotus. He took Raphelos and Gaia's Cradle, and this shows you the power of getting those back-to-back picks, because sure, he took Black Lotus because it's considered the best card in the cube, and it also keeps you open. But the first chance he got, he took Raphelos and Gaia's Cradle, which basically screamed to the table, I'm going to be the green creature mana ramp player. This is my corner, and if you want to come in and try to be in this spot, you're going to be fighting me for it, and you're not going to get a chance to have probably the most powerful mana ramp creature in the cube and the most powerful land for this archetype in the cube. You just don't get those because Adam took them. And then,
yeah, I think there's a pretty big value in planting your flag in a rotisserie draft. Like you can do a good amount of scaring someone else away as a result.
Right. And that's a powerful thing to do, because if you succeed in scaring the whole table away and you have an entire archetype to yourself, you can take the cards early that other people will fight for, just like the generally good cards, and then you just have all the stuff that you want. And that's an extremely great place to be. Just to round out the point, as the draft went back the other direction, it went Mana Vault. That's the 1 mana artifact that taps for 3, and then you have to do a bunch of things to untap it. And then Tropical Island, Scalding Tarn, then Splinter Twin. So there's another person planting their flag. Up until that point, they had taken like Mox Sapphire, Volcanic Island, and now they go Splinter Twin. And you're like, okay, I get what you're trying to do. Then it was Polluted Delta, Misty Rainforest as people were working out their fixing. And then it came back to me. And now I had an opportunity to plant my flag. And I did. I took Grim Monolith and Tolarian Academy, basically saying, I want to be the one who's hardcore on artifacts. So again, these double picks, as you can see, I took artifact and artifact land. Adam took mana creature and creature land, Cradle and Raphelos, and I took that. So these are important picks, but it's not like you can't plant your flag if you're not. As we saw, even as early as pick 3, people were taking cards like Splinter Twin to kind of get themselves in there as far as what they wanted to do. And again, just to sort of outline it, Jeff, who was the one, he took Mock Sapphire, then Library of Alexandria. So right now he's pretty open. Then he went Splinter Twin Kiki Jiki for his next 2 picks. So he's like, I'm doing this combo and nobody else even mess with this, right? Because he took the 2 ways that you can really go off. So now he basically knows that unless somebody actively is trying to cut him, he gets to get Pestermite, he gets to get Deceiver Exarch, and he can kind of build the optimal version of that combo. Another thing that pops up in these that makes it more interesting if your cube happens to have combos like this is that if you take Splinter Twin early in a vintage cube draft that you're doing, most cubes are more cards in the cube than are actually drafted in any given cube draft, right? So there's a chance that you take that and 1 or 2 of your combo pieces just aren't opened, even if you were going to get them regardless. Here, that's not the case. The whole cube's available, so you can really build an optimal version of a synergistic or combo deck like this. Another one to look at to take a different tack on it is Thomas. And Thomas started with, he was the one that took Ancestral Recall. He had the 3rd pick in the draft. And he's like, Ancestral Recall. He didn't want to mess with the colorless mana, the Moxen, or anything like that. He's like, I want the peak power level, even if it is a hotly contested color. Then he took Mana Drain. So he's like, okay, I've got these 2 super powerful blue cards. Then he went with Tropical Island and then Snapcaster Mage. So through 4 picks, Thomas really hadn't planted a flag in anything other than saying, I'm going to be in blue. But the problem is that there's a lot of people in blue and you're going to be fighting for it. So that's it. Another take on it, and a similar one, is Boaz. He took Mana Crypt with the 2nd pick, then took Tinker. So again, he was kind of saying, hey, I want to do this artifact thing. But he also knew that I was moving in on artifacts as well. So he took Mana Vault next and then took Sundering Titan, which is a great pick because it lets you can cast it off of cards like Mana Crypt and Mana Vault that he has, way earlier than you normally would be. And it's also a premium target for Tinker that other people might want to play. So anyway, you can see how people started to sort of solidify their archetypes. But of course, this is face up and people can cut you. So some of that did happen during the course of the draft, and you do have to be aware of it because people get quite a few picks. Logistically, this thing took about 2.5 hours for us to do the draft, and then we played the rounds after that. That was pretty good. I was actually kind of bracing myself for 3.5 or 4 hours of draft, which I think is too long to make it like super fun. Like at some point you're like, can we just be done with this? But it ended up only taking about 2 to 2.5 hours to finish the draft. We decided to do 38 picks total. In a normal draft, you'd get 45 in a normal cube draft. But, you don't play so many of your cards that we figured that we'd shorten that down to 38. And, after you get some sideboard stuff, it's pretty tight at 38. I would actually go a little lower than that even and maybe try out like 35. Do you think that's going too low if you play 23 and you get a few extra?
I think 35 is reasonable because you're not going to have access to 10 lands. So it means you can't waffle too much, but I don't think that really happens anyway. And adding a little bit of a sense of urgency seems like it could be good. I'm curious what the optimal strategy is in these things because there is some amount of wanting to, like we talked about earlier, plant your flag, say I'm going to be mono green, whatever. But there's got to be some amount to also to wanting to be more flexible and end up in a spot where you're able to
pivot.
To pivot if you're getting the right cards for it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's somewhat self-correcting in that way because so many of the most powerful cards are also the most narrow cards in the cube. This is where like Thomas took Ancestral Recall and Mana Drain. It's self-correcting in the way that everybody wants the blue cards. So you're going to get cut on blue by multiple players. Where like somebody like me, I took 2 Moxen, Grim Monolith, and then Tolarian Academy. Well, Tolarian Academy is one of, if not the most powerful lands in the cube, full stop, but it's also very narrow. You really do need to support that type of card. So it is interesting how far can you go. One of our players took a while until kind of the grand scheme was shown. That was Boaz, who I mentioned, who took Mana Crypt, then Tinker, then Mana Vault, then Sundering Titan. His next pick, though, was really interesting. He took Strip Mine and then Crucible of Worlds with the pick after that. Then the next 2 picks were Wasteland and Fast Bond. And if you've never faced down the combination of Crucible, Fast Bond, and Strip Mine, it's not very fun. They get to kill all of your lands, and basically you get 1 land for the rest of the game. It's kind of an auto win, assuming that the boards, that they're not horrendously behind on board at that point. So, that was one where Boaz was clearly kind of staying open. He had the Tinker, so he went for the artifacts and then the Sundering Titan. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to move in on this mana denial strategy that actually goes fairly well with Sundering Titan as well. And go for the Strip Mine, Wasteland, Crucible, Fast Bond. And he did also end up with Ramanop Excavator, which is, it's Crucible of Worlds, but as a creature. So yeah, the balance on that's really interesting, because if you just shoot for the stars, you can obviously have the best possible version, where if you wait too long, you might miss out. That said, one of the interesting developments happened where people weren't really drafting black. It just wasn't going particularly highly. And I ended up getting a 13th and 14th picks. My 13th and 14th picks were Mind Twist and Demonic Tutor.
Wow,
those should not have been in there still.
Yeah, that is a lot later than I would expect, especially for Demonic Tutor. But I suppose it's a higher priority to take the cards you would then tutor for, rather than take the Demonic Tutor itself, right?
Exactly. And that is how that played out. Plus, one of our players, Alex, he was kind of hanging around with like Sneak Attack and Grizzlebrand, but not really committing to the Reanimator plan. And then he did. And he ended up getting, most of the good stuff for a Reanimator. But he did actually wait a little bit too long, and somebody cut Reanimate from him. Like the actual card Reanimate got taken. So he didn't end up with that. I mean, he got the other stuff, so it wasn't like the end of the world for him. But I mean, these are the things that can happen, is somebody could say, well, I could play a Reanimate or just cut it from you, and I'll just do that. And then you get into the middle part of the draft, which is definitely the most fun, because it's kind of wide open. And you can find some really cool stuff. I mean, like I ended up taking a ton of Signets to support my artifact sub theme. But like one of the cards I got was 22nd pick. I took Golos, right? And Golos was great in my deck. It let me search up a couple of utility lands, namely Tolarian Academy. But also I could actually activate Golos. Like I had enough Signets, and I could put a few basics in my deck that I could just fire off Golos, and you know how that goes. You start activating Golos in a Vintage Cube, and the game ends pretty quickly. Last thing to mention or a couple of last things. One thing was blue was completely decimated. I took a photo. There was like 5 or 6 blue cards total left over after this was done. Blue is extremely popular in these, not just for its power level, but just like because people want to play it. So there were 8 blue cards left over when the draft was over. I'll tell them to you. It was Trinket Mage, Gifts Ungiven, Terramander, Arcane Artisan, Treasure Cruise, Show and Tell, Control Magic, and Jace Beleren. Every other blue card got taken. It just the table looked completely insane because we laid them out by color, and there was like wood, showing there, and then like on the white end of the table, nothing. I mean, only a few white cards got taken. So if you wanted to do that, you could have also. Nobody played mono red. Red cards got taken, but nobody was actually just like, I'm just going to be the mono red player here. So, those are types of things that happens. As it worked out, Thomas won with his blue control deck. He committed early to some big mana cards like Upheaval and Mindslaver, but then didn't take any mana ramp at all. So he ended up ditching those, and he ended up moving in on Storm kind of later in the draft. But he wasn't
a good
really,
sign.
yeah, he wasn't really set up for it to be like a pure Storm deck. So he played like blue control, where Storm was his win condition, and made that work. His games were very exciting. I watched the last of them. He had some close calls. He actually just fully fizzled out one game and then just did it again, and Minds Desired into stuff, and ended up winning that game by like the narrowest of margins. It was really fun to watch. But he ended up winning. And cackling his whole way to victory as well. He was very happy about that. I recommend doing this. that's kind of the point of this. Is there was some interesting strategic stuff, but my broad strokes on this is you should do this if you have a cube just to mix it up. It was really fun, and I gotta tell you, you get a lot of value about the discussions that get had leading up to it and the discussions that you have coming away from it. One thing I would definitely recommend is telling the people in it where they're going to pick ahead of time, because it was so fun. Yeah, they get to think and talk about it and everything. One slight rules thing to make sure that you do is make sure that you still randomize who plays who. Sometimes, the default is to play the person that you're furthest away from, but it actually screws things up if you know who you're going to play in the first round, because you might draft a bunch of cards just specifically against them. And that's just a bad incentive structure. You don't want to have to waste picks just because you happen to know who you're playing against.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So anyway, try it. It's really fun. I'll put a link to the spreadsheet once again in the show notes in case anybody wants to see how things ended up playing out in hours, just like as an example. But I want to mention, you can do this with any cube. It doesn't have to be a vintage cube to make this work. You can just do a cube rotisserie draft if you're with your friends, if you happen to have a cube. So I do highly recommend it. It was super fun to do.
One key thing that I think matters here also is like have the cube physically there. Like,
yes.
Because I've actually done this exact thing on a spreadsheet online, and it was just so much less fun.
And it's so much longer, too. Yeah. One of the things is Adam printed out pieces of paper, or maybe it was Ryan, I can't remember, but they had all the cards in the cube sorted by like what type of card it was, what color it was, and then by mana cost. So like if you weren't as familiar with the cube, you could go, hey, does this thing have gifts ungiven? And you could just look and find and see if it was there. And if you wanted, you could scratch them off as you went and see what was left over, or circle cards that you were interested in. And then we all had a laptop or a tablet or whatever up as well with the spreadsheet, so that you were always up on who was coming up next and what people had taken and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that was really sweet. Some interesting rule stuff does pop up that you have to work your way through. Like, give me your take on this, Luis. What would be your rule for a house situation like this? For what can I grab my laptop to look up all the picks you did in the middle of the match to see? Oh, did you end up taking the spell pierce?
Nah. I don't love that.
I don't like that either. Because mainly just for time, right? It's just you don't want people constantly grabbing pieces of paper, but you also don't want to shift the incentive to the draft portion where they're writing everything down. It gets kind of awkward, but whatever. None of these are actual issues. They're just kind of like rules minutia. But anyway, it's fun and you should definitely try it. And I'll put that link in the notes as well. All right. You want to call it a show here, Luis?
Sounds good.
All right. That's going to do it for limited resources for this week. As Luis mentioned before, the Players Tour is coming up this weekend in Brussels and Nagoya, and then the next weekend after that is the one from Phoenix. I'm actually covering both, so I'll be doing those, and it's going to be exciting. We get to see high level Limited and Pioneer, as it turns out, for this first one. So that's going to be really cool. And we certainly hope you'll check it out. Also, make sure you check out Channel Fireball this weekend while that event is happening for that special deal that Luis mentioned. There's a nice little incentive for you to show up to the site there on the weekend. And you'll see more about that as we're doing the broadcast as well. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. And you can find everything related to this show at lrcast.com, including links to streams and social media and everything like that, plus every episode of the show ever archived on that website. So check it out, lrcast.com, if you want to go back into the history of the show and listen to some of the older stuff or whatever. With that, we'll see you next week.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot because I was on a really awesome podcast earlier this week, Scribe Me a River, with Dennis and Riley. But don't worry, that wasn't my favorite podcast I've been on this week.
God, I already know what you're going to say because you went on Magic FM, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You went on Magic FM. I get it. I get where this is going. I saw the tweet. I know what's going on here.
Okay, look. They have a section on their podcast called Power Moves. And I got asked what my power move was. First of all, do you know what my power move is?
Of course I know what your power move is.
What is it?
It's showing up with no dice. Yeah, I listened to they posted it on social. Your social guy's just killer. Yeah. He took that part out and posted it, but yes.
Well, yes. But yes, you already knew that anyway.
I hate your power move. I hate it.
Yeah. So
Are you going to describe it to our
okay?
I show up
when I show up for a match of professional Magic the Gathering. I will always have my deck. I will sometimes have a pen, and I will never have dice or paper because I don't like carrying them around.
And he's not kidding, by the way. This isn't a Luis joke. I've seen him play many, many, many events, including in the feature match area at the Pro Tour where he goes, hey, Shota, do you have any paper or whatever? It's like, oh, my God.
So, look, to be fair, I'm not doing it because it's a power move. I'm not trying to intimidate, but I also do it because I really don't like. Look, I like my mind to be clear. I don't want to have a whole bag of stuff to carry around. I just like carrying on my deck, and that's it. That's what keeps me zen. So I don't know what is your power move?
Come on, dude. Like, you really think that it makes you more zen? That if you just had this stuff with you, you would never have to sit down and be like, hey, I don't have any dice. Although I know you don't actually ask for the dice. You just grab them. But, do you have a pen? Do you have a piece of paper? That doesn't bog you down every round, having to like mildly inconvenience every opponent you play against.
Look, I feel
come on.
I feel like someone on Twitter just said that they said you sat down for me across from me at a GP and I immediately tore off a piece of paper and handed it to you. See, look, that's
conditioned people around this. What is my power move? I hate anything power move related.
Is that your power move? Is your power move to disdain power moves?
Yes, I like if I ever felt like I was doing something as a power move, I would stop doing it. How about this? My power move is like in basketball. Right? I've got some power moves there. The fadeaway or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that power moves are a critical part of your arsenal. I think you do have a power move. Hold on.
The greatest thief in the multiverse.
Oh my God.
That's your power move.
That's my power move.
It's Jack Fate, the greatest thief in the multiverse.